We've done a lot of talking about the size of our Air Force, and it seems like it might be a good idea to put it in a perspective. Do you happen to know what the size of our Air Force was during the Desert Storm related to how what that size is today? Either one of you.
Senator, it's about 30% smaller than it was in Desert Storm.
30% smaller than it was in Desert Storm.
Yes, sir.
And are we, would you say we're in a much greater threatened position today than we were during Desert
We
Storm?
have the same level of tasking today as we did during Desert Storm, and we have 55 squadrons rather than 134.
You know, I think it's important to have people like you in the uniforms particularly to be talking about this, because the American people don't know that. And you've heard me say this before, but that's a very frustrating thing when you go back and you're talking to real people who are listening to false reports from the media, assuming that we have this great superior power that we have historically had, and perhaps in some times of our history, but don't have today. I had a hearing on the committee, the subcommittee I chair on readiness. We had the 4 vices there, and it was the Vice Chief of the Air Force, General Wilson, no relation, I guess, who made the statement after we talked about it for a while. Are we in the same situation, a similar situation? It sounds like that we were faced back in the late 80s when we had a hollow force. And I was very proud of him because he said, yeah, we are. And he went into some of the details as to what we were back at that time compared to where we are today. General Goldfein, what are your thoughts about that?
Sir, I absolutely align with that statement. I think it's important, too, for us to have a common understanding and a definition of what constitutes a hollow force, because that term gets thrown around a lot. And I actually went back, and there's Senator McCain, actually, sir, you gave a definition of this in 1993, and I think it actually captures it still for today. And you said, readiness is not a matter of funding operations and maintenance at the proper level. It's not a matter of funding adequate numbers of high-quality personnel. It's not a matter of funding superior weapons and munitions, or funding strategic mobility and pre-positioning, or funding high operations tempos, or funding realistic levels of training at every level of combat. Readiness is all of these things and more. A force begins to go hollow the moment it loses overall mix of combat capabilities in any one critical area. That definition in 1993 applies today. And so when we talk about the hollow force, we got to talk about holistically all those things that go in to producing a ready force, and it's training, and it's personnel, and it's equipment, and they all have to come together.
That's good, General Goldfein. I think that's something we need to talk about. And while you say it's difficult to define what a hollow force is, the general public does know about a hollow force. They knew the conditions that we were faced back in the late 80s and how similar they are today. Just for a minute, I want to touch on the BRAC recommendations. The budget, it's my understanding, is looking toward the years, 2021, and so to be looking at a possible BRAC and making preparations before that time?
Yes, sir. I think you'll see from the Secretary of Defense a request for a BRAC, I believe, in 2021 is what you'll see coming in from the Secretary. From our perspective, we tend to focus on the C closure, but I'll tell you, for the Air Force, it's as much about the R realignment. And we have got some great examples of how we have been able to, with the help of Congress and this committee, realign forces in order to become more combat capable and more lethal. And so for me, it's as much about realignment as it is about closure.
Yeah, but you have to keep in mind that one of the facts is that there hasn't been a BRAC round yet, and I've been involved in these BRAC rounds since 1987, where they have not lost money the first 3 years or so. And this is one of the big problems. This is at a time that's different than most times in the past. We really can't afford to be paying for something that we don't need. And the second thing is, we don't know once we start rebuilding what our needs are going to be. And I'm sure that that probably came to their attention when they're making that decision not to do something until that time.
Senator, if I could just add.
Yes, of course.
with respect to base realignment and closure, one of the things that I think we really need to do is look at infrastructure based on the needs of the warfighter. And for the Air Force, that's less about square footage and concrete than it is airspace and capabilities to be able to train as we will fight, not only today, but into the future. And some of the language with respect to base closure restricts us from doing some of that analysis. And I think we need to do that analysis to be able to tell where we have excess capacity and of what kind.
Yeah. Well, my time's expired, but for the record, General Goldfein, would you said, I looked it up in your written statement, it wasn't there, but you said for every mission that I have described to you, in your opening statement, you said our adversaries are advancing. I'd kind of like to have in a written statement where we are relative to different adversaries out there, something you probably wouldn't want to talk about here anyway.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.